This is a little mini course about pricing structures. I think you're going to get a lot of value out of this. It's not about how you get to the price that you're going to charge the client. It's more about how you structure the business relationship between you and your client relating to the price that you're going to charge. Now, before we dig too deep into this, I think you're going to want these slides, so I made them available to you in a little free ebook that you can download. Link is in the description. Be sure to check it out and download these if you want a little resource at the ready for how to structure your pricing for your clients. Now, the first pricing structure that is my go-to for most things is a fixed bid price. The fixed bid price, it's you define the scope, and then the client agrees to the scope, and along with the scope of the project, you give them a set price. As long as we adhere to this scope, we're going to charge you this. That's a fixed bid price. And this is the go-to. I recommend this in most situations. Now let's look at the pros and cons of a fixed bid price. So the agency pros. The agency, the faster you work, the more money you make on the project. And this is what I love about fixed bid projects, is that it rewards you for your ability to execute quickly, not just in production speed, but in your ability to arrive at a solution faster will yield more money to you. So it rewards you for your expertise as well. Your production speed and your expertise are rewarded in a fixed bid engagement. Now, the pro for the client is that the client knows exactly what the price is going to be at the start. As long as we define this scope and adhere to it, this is what you're going to be charged. So that's a benefit to the client. They can budget for this engagement. Now, the negative for you, it may yield less profit if the project takes longer than expected. This is the con, is that you give them a set price. Now, if the project takes you a lot longer than expected, you could even lose money on a fixed bid project. So you've got to make sure that your price is accurate to the scope. Now, con for the client, that the price is often padded so that the client may pay more for the project than if they did in a different pricing structure. Now, a padded price means you think that it's going to take you $2,000 of your time to execute on this, but you add 30%, 50% of padding to it. So you may charge the client $3,000 just in case the scope goes crazy or the client is difficult or whatever. You pad the price. So a client may pay more for a fixed bid project. Now, in most cases, this is the most beneficial structure between you and your client, fixed bid. And when you should use it is when the scope can be clearly defined. Use a fixed bid price, and every project that can be bid at a fixed price should be. I bid almost everything at my agency at a fixed bid pricing structure. That was the go-to. If we can define the scope, we use fixed bid. All right, let's go to the next one, hourly. Hourly is the default for way too many creatives in the world. They just default to hourly pricing because they don't know how to scope a project and price it appropriately. So they just say, okay, I'm just going to do it hourly. And in an hourly agreement, you and your client both agree on an hourly rate, and you charge for all the time that you spend on their project. That's an hourly structure. And there are pros and cons to an hourly engagement. Let's look at the pros and cons of this. So the pros, the benefit for the agency or for you as a freelancer is that you can bill for all of your time. It eliminates the risk of an indecisive client. If the client wants 7 rounds of changes, well, that's fine because you're just charging them by the hour and you just keep adding hours to the bill. Now, the con to you, it does not allow you to price for the value of the work you produce. One of the great examples in history is the Nike logo that the lady who designed the Nike logo charged a small amount to Nike, and then the logo goes on to be worth billions of dollars to the business. They eventually made it right with the designer. But if she would have just charged hourly and say that the Nike swoosh took her 4 hours and she was charging $50 an hour, then it's only a $200 bill for the Nike logo. And that does not have proper value to the company. The work itself has more value than the $200 in time that was spent on it. So that's a big negative to hourly pricing, and why I recommend not using hourly pricing as your default. There are better options. Let's look at the pros and cons for a client. The client can be as indecisive as they want. They can change the scope. They can put you on different projects. They can pull a project, and it makes it not complicated to just shift gears and change their mind a bunch of times because you're just billing them by the hour. So that's a benefit to the client. Now, the negative to a client is that it's difficult to budget for the work. It's hard for them to really know, what is this going to cost? A lot of times in hourly engagements, I would tell the client, okay, we think this is going to be maybe 4 or 6 hours of time, just to prove that before we start billing you by the hour. But it's hard to budget for it because you really don't know how long it's going to take for some of these things when you're in an hourly engagement. All right, so those are the pros and cons. Now, when should you use an hourly pricing structure? Use it for small projects, for maintenance projects, and easy updates. In our agency, we would do it for like bug fixes on a website where you don't know really how long it's going to take. There's something wrong. You dig into the code and you're just charging the client by the hour because you don't know what it's going to take to fix it. So things like that, maintenance requests, or just changing a little typo here or there, something on some live website, can be an hourly engagement. So there's a time and a place for it, but it isn't usually inside of a project strategy where you're building a website for a client and you just charge them hourly and however long it takes. It's not as effective there, again, because you can't charge for the value of the work that you're producing for the client. All right, let's look at the next one, retainers. Now, retainers are really, really tricky. And I have some content coming about retainers in the future here. Retainers are usually based on hours. This is how people think. They want to say to the client, okay, you just give us 40 hours a month and we'll charge you X amount of dollars for it. And it's tricky. Typically, you're going to give the client a discounted rate for committing to you a certain package of hours on a certain schedule, weekly or monthly or something like that. Now, I don't like retainers particularly because they get really messy with rollover on hours and things. I like a better way to do retainers that I'm going to talk about here in a second. When to use a retainer. Now, a retainer can be used when the client has consistent needs, but they're unsure of project details. So they know that they need your services for months ahead, but they're not really sure what the projects are going to be. They just need someone available to them. And that's when a retainer can be an effective strategy. So consider retainers based on deliverables, not hours. Now, I prefer this strategy a ton. A retainer based on deliverables, not hours. So you have a client who every month you do a marketing engagement with them. You're not tracking your hours. You just tell them every month we're going to analyze your data, your website data, your sales data, your lead generation data. We're going to analyze your data and we're going to provide you with marketing insights. That's a great structure for a retainer because it's not set on hours. Like every week, we're going to give you 4 hours of our time. That's how a lot of people do retainers. I don't like retainers based on hours. I like them based on deliverables. So don't shy away from a retainer if it is based on deliverables, that you're going to do a certain thing for the client every single month. It can work in social media, for example. You're going to build for them 5 or 10 Instagram posts every single month, or you're going to create 2 3-minute videos for them every single month. There's some kind of set deliverable, and it's not based on time. It's just based on this is what we're giving you each month, and this is what you're going to pay. Retainers can be effective in that structure. Okay, now let's go through the pros and cons of a retainer. And as you can see here, the benefits to the agency is that you're going to get guaranteed revenue every single month. But the con to you is that usually in a retainer, you're going to reduce your rate due to the client committing to you certain quantity of work each month. So reducing your rate reduces your profit margin. That's a negative. And then the other negative that I glossed over a little bit is that if you do a retainer based on hours, it is super, super messy to track the hours, because usually people are going to want a rollover of hours. If they give you 80 hours per month retainer, and then at the end of the month, you've only used 60 hours, the client's going to want you to roll those hours over to the next month. This is pretty typical. You can structure your contract differently and not have any rollover. But most of the time, a retainer is going to include some rollover hours. So now you roll 20 hours into the next month because you only use 60, and now the next month you have 100 hours. And then you're going through that month, and if they only use 40 hours, how many do you roll over? You get into this mess of rollover and rollback hours. Oh, can we just use some of the hours for next month and this month? Oh, we didn't use all our hours last month. Can we use them next month? That's the kind of conversation that comes up in retainers based on hours. So like I said, retainers based on deliverables gets rid of that. You're going to do a certain quantity of something for the client each month, certain deliverables, videos, social media posts, marketing analysis. There are all kinds of different things that you might do under a retainer for the client, not based on hours. All right, let's look at the client pros and cons. The client gets a reduced rate for guaranteeing the hours. That's pretty typical inside of a retainer. And then the negative to the client is that the client must fill the retained hours. So now they're on the hook. They've committed a certain quantity to you at a reduced rate. They're on the hook to fill those hours as they would to any employee they might have. All right, so that's retainers. There are some benefits to it. I didn't like retainers very much, and I didn't use them very much at my agency. I preferred a different structure that we came up with called the bucket of hours. And this was a much cleaner way to do what the intention of a retainer is. So let me tell you about bucket of hours. Bucket of hours. Now, we use these a lot at my agency, and it's similar to the retainer in that you're giving the client a discounted rate on your hourly rate for buying a certain bucket of hours that they can use over time. Now, different than a traditional typical retainer that people try and structure, where it's hours that need to be used each month, a bucket of hours can be used over a longer period of time. So we would sell bucket of hours to our clients and require that they were used in a 6-month time frame or a 1-year time frame, something like that. And we would give them a discounted rate based on the quantity of hours that they purchase. So if they buy 300 hours from our agency, it's this rate. If they buy 400, the rate goes a little smaller. If they buy 600, it goes a little smaller. You can create a tiered pricing structure to give the client incentive to purchase a bigger bucket of hours or make a bigger commitment to you. And then those hours are stretched over a longer period of time. So you're not doing this monthly accounting of tracking the hours each month and rolling them into the next month. You give them like 6 months or a year or 9 months or 3 months or some kind of set amount of time to use up the bucket before the hours expire. Let's look at the pros and cons of a bucket of hours. Now, the pros for the agency is that you get guaranteed revenue and workload for a set period of time. The client makes a commitment that this year or this quarter, we're going to use you for this amount of hours. Now you can budget your time against the hours that the client has purchased from you. The cons, like a traditional hourly based retainer, is that the rate reduces your profit margin. You reduce your rate, you reduce your profit margin. That's a negative. Also, the hours usage often fluctuates. For example, we had a client that would pre-purchase their hours for the year every single year when they got their marketing budget. They would just say, okay, we're ready. We're going to buy our 300 hours that we'll use this year. Now, in first quarter, they might use 5 hours. And in second quarter, we might use those hours to build some big thing for them and spend 200 hours on it. So you can't really gauge when are these requests going to hit. So it makes it a little bit more challenging. It's not a deal breaker, but it's a little more challenging for sure. Then you have pros and cons for the client. The benefit to the client, or the pro, is that the client gets a reduced rate for pre-purchasing the hours. The con for the client is that the client should pay in advance, which is a bigger initial outlay. When you buy a bucket of hours, you're giving them a discount because they're making a big commitment to you and they're pre-purchasing those hours in advance. So it's a bigger spend for the client at the start, but they stretch it over time. But you get the money all when they purchase that bucket. All right, when should you use a bucket of hours? When the scope and timeline cannot be defined. The client knows we have this big thing that we want to do this year. We're not exactly sure when it's going to hit. We're not exactly sure what it's going to be. We can't pinpoint the scope, but we know we have a big engagement. They could buy a bucket of hours and then you could just work off of those hours to create the thing that they want you to create. All right, let's move on to the dedicated resources. Dedicated resources. Now, this is kind of like an employee leasing program. And we did this at my agency, and the agency that I sold to did a ton of this, where your agency leases employees to a client. So you allocate certain employees to a specific client for a set period of time. Now, the idea with dedicated resources, let's look at the pros and cons, and hopefully you'll understand this a little bit better. The pros for the agency, it can give you good cash flow and confidence to expand your business because you know that you hired Sally and now you've leased Sally out to a certain client for a 6-month project. So you get cash flow, guaranteed cash flow and guaranteed profitability on Sally's dedication to that client. Now the cons is that you can't use that employee for other projects in your business. So you're promising that this employee is dedicated to this client. Now you lose Sally for the other projects that you have going in your business. So those are the pros and cons for the agency. The client pros and cons. The client pays a reduced rate for leasing one of your people or more of your people or you. They lease you out for a certain amount of time and they pay a reduced rate for that commitment that they're making to you. And then the con for the client is that they must keep your employee busy, just like if they were employing them as a salaried person. You're saying, Sally is now essentially an employee of Acme Business, your client, Acme client. And they have the responsibility to keep Sally productive and dedicated. Now, we did some dedicated resources engagements with NBC television years ago at my agency, and it worked out great. They needed to expand their development team. And we had some developers, and we had a couple developers dedicated to working for NBC during a certain period of time. The agency that I sold to had a huge dedicated resource agreement with a big tech company where they had like 30-something employees that were working on site at the business, at the client's business. They had their own wing on a floor of their building that was all our team members over there. And it was super profitable and beneficial to the agency. It was great cash flow for them because we had this whole batch of employees that were dedicated just to that one client. And businesses do this sometimes because the way that they perceive their numbers is a little differently if it's external cost versus salaried employee cost. Sometimes a big business can get budget for an external vendor cost, and they can't get budget to add salaried overhead positions for their company. So you'll see this sometimes in big companies like that, where they'll want to dedicate resources or lease employees like this. Okay, dedicated resources can be super beneficial, super effective, super profitable. It's best for long-term engagements with no clearly defined scope. The client just knows we need more people, and they lease your people instead of going and finding other people somewhere else to hire full-time or to manage. It's also good when the client needs to temporarily expand their team size. Is a good time for them to use dedicated resource. Let's go to the last one in this video. It is the partnership. The partnership. Partnerships share the risk and the reward of the project. The agency compensation comes when the work is done and effective for the client. So you might do a partnership with a client where you say to the client, okay, we don't want any money at the start. What we want is a percentage of the revenue that we create for your business. So you want 10% of all the sales that you generate through the marketing campaign and design creative execution that you do for the client. You're just going to take a percentage of that business, of the revenue from it. This is a partnership. This is a partnership between you and the client, both committed to the success of the project that you're working on, or the skills and expertise you're bringing to the table. You're going to directly be compensated for it in a partnership agreement like this. Another wording for this, which I actually kind of like better, is it's pay for performance. Pay for performance. We are committed. We know we're going to produce results for you. We don't want any money. We just want to be paid for the performance of our work. Now, value-based pricing is a thing that's been talked about a lot in the design world. There are a few people that love to talk about value-based pricing. And the idea of value-based pricing is that you price your work based on the value that you might provide to the client. My preference on value-based pricing is that if you love that concept so much, then do it in a pay-for-performance strategy. Don't give them a percentage of what you think you might create for them in value. Do it based on the actual value that you actually create in a pay-for-performance scenario. So kind of put your money where your mouth is. If you think I'm going to produce results, and you're so confident that you're going to produce results, then take a percentage of the results that you produce for the client as your form of compensation. So that's just a little sidebar on value-based pricing and how it kind of relates to this pay-for-performance or partnership structures. Let's look at the pros and cons of a partnership. The agency can yield big revenue if the work produces results for the client. That's a great benefit. You can likely get paid significantly more for the work if you're able to produce the results that you hope for the client. The cons is that it can yield no revenue if the work produces little or no results. That's a negative. You're putting your money where your mouth is. You're saying, we're going to go into a partnership with you. We want to get paid on results. If it produces big results, we get a lot of money. If it doesn't produce any results, we don't get any money. So you're sharing the risk with the client. Now, the client pros and cons, the client benefit is that they pay a lot less at the start. Usually nothing in a structure like this. And the cons is that they may pay a lot more for the work than it may have cost in a different pricing structure. If you would have done it as a fixed bid, the price could have been here, but because you did it as a partnership, they paid nothing at the start, but you're getting paid on the results. And if you produce results, you could get paid this at the end of it. So there's a lot of benefits and negatives to a partnership kind of structure. I didn't like it very much, and I didn't do these at my agency. I liked to be confident in the work we were going to produce and just do it as fixed bid and not be in a partnership with a client based on the revenue that it's going to generate. Sometimes it's really tough to track. Where did these sales actually come from? And is the client actually going to pay me? Are they going to finagle the numbers on their side to pay me less? There are all kinds of unknowns when you go into a partnership, and you should view it as a business partnership between you and the client. If you're going to do this kind of pricing structure, do it as a business partnership, a joint venture engagement of some kind. Now, when should you use a partnership? When the agency has high confidence that it can produce results and the client has limited budget. That's the best time to use a partnership structure. You love the concept that the client has for their business. You're confident you can produce results. They don't have a lot of money. You know that if you do this well, they're going to generate a lot of money. Let's just take a portion of that, a percentage of that as our compensation as we deliver revenue to their business. All right, those are 6 different pricing structures that you can look at for your business and how you structure your pricing and your engagements with your clients. My preference is fixed bid in almost every scenario. I also did a lot of bucket of hours engagements with clients. I liked that better than hourly and retainers. I like dedicated resources a lot, and we did a lot of great revenue off of dedicated resources. I'm not a fan of retainers based on hours, and I'm not a fan of going into partnerships with clients to be paid on the results of the work. I'd rather do it in a fixed bid. So that's my little summary of these different pricing structures. Hope you got some good, interesting, valuable little nuggets out of this video. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you again sometime soon.